Welcome back to Sonic Impact. How's everybody doing? We are thrilled to have you join us for a new episode, the show where guests come on and talk about the influences that started the spark, that lit the fire, that led them on these incredible career journeys. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited about this week's episode to have a musician and filmmaker. I identify as both of those things, or at least aspiring to be both of those things. So it was such a great conversation to hear about how he actually made it happen.
Well, this is our first bassist who's ever been on the show, which is kind of interesting. Our first filmmaker slash musician, like 20 years with the Wallflowers, Grammy winner, played with incredible bands like toured with The Who, with the Stones, Petty. Like there's so many incredible stories that Greg tells. And then, of course, he has a whole other side, which is this film career and this really cool documentary called Immediate Family.
Honestly, he's living my dream life. How do I become Greg?
You should ask him. You
Well,
should.
I guess we did in our whole entire interview that everyone is about to hear.
That's right. So we're thrilled everybody's here for this interview with Greg Richling of the Wallflowers. We hope you enjoy it. Everybody, please welcome Greg Richling from the Wallflowers.
Hello.
Hi, Greg. How are
Hey, thanks
you?
for having me.
Thanks for being
Hello.
here.
Yeah. Happy
Greg,
Thanksgiving almost.
Happy almost.
you're in LA celebrating in LA this year?
You know, I'm actually up in Lake Arrowhead.
Lucky
Weren't
you.
you there
I had a
recently?
flood at the house that I was living in for 8 years, so I came up to the lake to kind of get away from the water exposure.
That's
Well, we
terrible.
hope
Yeah.
you take you away from all of that today. So we're thrilled you're
This'll be
here.
great.
Thanks for coming on. So just to set you up a little bit, you know, you were the bassist for the Wallflowers for 20 years. You've been a music producer and you're now a film producer. And I'd imagine that's not the easiest transition for everyone to go from being the bassist of a rock band to producing movies. I think a lot of people, when they move on from music, they say, I don't know what to do, and they don't necessarily know what to do. So you clearly have a very talented roster of skills. Want to sort of ask, how have you been able to do so much variety in the arts, in music and film, and do it so well?
Well, thank you for that. I have a part of my brain that's missing that I have sort of like I'm not afraid to take risks. I think is sort of the built-in. But I grew up in LA, and I always kind of had this dual interest in film, and television and music. My mother worked for an executive producer in TV, and I started running and doing PA work in my teens. But I also got turned on to music from friends at school when I was in high school. So I was sort of one of those people that could never really make up their mind which side to tackle. So I just decided to do both. So after school, I was, in the garage rehearsing with my band. And then, I would be PAing on weekends. And I kind of always sort of had both worlds going. And I ended up going to film school at Boston University and, made student films. And when I graduated from college, I started working for TriStar Television for a producer in the early 90s. And that's when I got the call from my old schoolmate, Jacob Dillon, that they had moved on from their original bass player and they had a tour starting in a week. And did I want to try out?
Oh my God.
So I had to go to my boss at TriStar and say, hey, I have the ability to see what it's like to, get on a tour bus and really make a go of this music thing in a way that, at a level that I hadn't experienced. The band already had an album out on Virgin Records. They were about to embark on a tour with 10,000 Maniacs and about a month-long club tour after that. And so, I tried out for the band and I got the gig. And what I thought was going to be a couple month tour ended up being a 20-year divergence into into
Wow.
music. So the funny thing is, I'm actually doing now what I went to school for, whereas the band
Full
was sort
circle.
of the fun thing that I enjoyed doing that kind of turned into more than I imagined it would at the time.
Yeah,
Right.
it's very rare to be able to cover all the bases in our business. So
Yeah.
congrats on an incredible career.
And
Oh, thank
I am particularly so excited to have you because I feel like we have a lot in common. I also went to film school. I went to Emerson, so
Oh,
fellow Boston College.
oh,
Um,
nice.
and I'm also a musician. I love music, and I'm very interested in the intersection of them. I
Mm,
also grew up in LA, and my dad worked in TV and is also a musician. So I had like exposure to all of that growing up and have always known I loved both of them. And I've
mm.
never wanted to have to choose. So I'm very excited to dive into how you were able to do
Oh,
both.
thank you. Yeah, well, that we do have a lot in common then. You know, I think I knew before the band really took off. I remember saying to somebody that I knew, I don't remember who, but I remember saying to them, I'm not going to be on the road. Like, I'm not going to be 70 and out on the road. Like, I kind of already knew that there was an expiration date on being a touring musician. I knew that I wanted to experience that, but I also knew that I'm a bit of a homebody. I don't like to just, keep traveling around. I like to kind of immerse myself in, LA or wherever and kind of get into things. And I kind of white knuckled touring, to be honest with you. It was like I always enjoyed making records and I always enjoyed being in the studio. And it kind of dawned on me at one point after we'd finished recording our second record, with One Headlight and Sixth Avenue that launched the band. I kind of realized, oh, now I've got to go support this thing. It was sort of an afterthought, it was like, oh God, now I got to leave forever. Um, and everybody's different. I've met so many people through the years from other bands that they love being out there. That's their life. They wouldn't have it any other way. But when things after I'd made about I don't know, a handful of records with the band, and Napster hit, and we weren't making any money off record sales anymore, and we had to stay out on the road even longer. That's when I think I started to think about my exit strategy, so to speak. you
Yeah.
know, I had a son in 2005 with my wife, and we went on a very long hiatus at that point. I had been, touring and recording for 12 years up to that point. And around 2005, when my son was born, we went on a long hiatus. The band wasn't getting along great at the time, and we were having a lot of issues with our label, Interscope. Big shocker. Band has trouble with label. We've heard that one before. But we went on a hiatus, and I started getting into record producing and raising my son, and was really enjoying kind of being off the road. And I did that for about 6 or 7 years, and then Jacob called and said, "Hey, how do you feel about making another Wallflower record?" And this was around 2011. And I said, "Well, I've got to go to Colorado to produce a record, and I'll be home in about 10 days, and let's talk about it." And he said, "What do you say we go make a record in Nashville with Jay Joyce producing, and the band can all write the material together? I'll write the lyrics, of course, but the whole band can come in with ideas." And that appealed to me because I thought I was going to be going back to the group with some kind of some kind of growth, being able to be a part of the writing this time. And I had a great experience making that album, and I toured it for about a year and a half, which brings us to about the summer of 2013. And I really just had a very strong feeling inside that that was it for me in that realm. I was good. I made the kind of record I finally
Yep.
wanted to make with the band. I went out on the road again. I didn't want to be gone. I felt like I was about an inch too tall for the bunks at this point.
It's really
And
not a sustainable lifestyle. I don't
no,
know how people are doing it into their 70s and 80s. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Well, I think it has something to do with what you said. I think you're either the kind of person that says, "Hey, because when I was leaving the band, I remember talking even to other people in the group and people that I knew from other bands, and they were like, yeah, I don't really love being out here either, but I don't know what else I would do.
Yeah.
And my answer to that at the time, and I don't hold this against anyone because everybody's different and everybody does what's right for them. But I just remember saying to myself, well, I don't exactly know what I'm going to do after 30 years of being in bands either, but I know that this isn't what I want to continue doing, and I'll
Hmm.
figure it out. And I just had to take that leap of faith. And it was a very, you said it earlier, it was a difficult transition. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When you do one thing from 13 years old to 43 years old and you say, I'm not going to do that anymore, I'm going to go do this other thing that I'm interested in that I haven't done for a while, um, you know you're taking on actually a lot more than you realize at the time when you make that decision. It's a much more difficult road, and you add a family on top of that and responsibility. If it was just me, I could have lived in a broom closet for 10 years and figured things out and tried different things, but I had the responsibility of, I've been married for 26 years now. I've got a 20-year-old son in college, and but at the time he was 8 when I left, and I had a lot of responsibility. So I did a few things in between that led me to kind of where I am now, which we can get into if you want.
Well, that's great. And look, there's a lot to unpack here. I want to go back to the beginning. I think we
Yeah.
love talking about your early start. And I think, take us back to that moment. We both grew up at the same time. It was the 80s in LA. You've
Mm.
got KROQ bubbling, you've got MTV, you've got the clubs and, all these bands from LA. Just it must have been an incredible moment for a young wannabe
Mm.
filmmaker, musician take us like that feeling of being around that as a teenager.
Yeah, you're right. Not to be nostalgic, and everybody kind of feels that, I think their childhood, there's a lot that sticks with you from that era, of your life. It's a lot of firsts, as they say. Growing up in Los Angeles in the 80s and going to schools that, I had a lot of friends whose parents were in the business, a lot of fathers that were film producers and TV executive producers. And um, the funny thing is, people ask now, like, what's your dad do? Or, but back then that wasn't what we did, right? They were producers, hey, my dad produced Die Hard, the screenings at the Abco over the weekend. Do you want to come? Oh, sure. I think when you grow up around people in the entertainment business, I think a little bit of that, you know, awe, or awestruck side of things it's a little muted, because you
Mhm.
go to someone's house and, oh, Kevin Costner's having a meeting in the living room, or this producer's on the lot, and you're going to see a movie before it comes out, and part of the cast is there, and you're meeting, there's Bruce Willis, and you definitely sort of take note and say, wow, this is really cool,
Yeah.
but it's, I think early on you realize, like, these are just people that have a certain talent, so it kind of strips away the sort of weirdo factor, the weirdo layer of it. It's like,
Right.
these are people, they have a talent, they're in film. But
But I'm actually
I
I'm
Mhm.
actually trying to get at the music side, like that moment in 82, 83, when it was
Yeah.
like the music of LA, the music of MTV that really inspired you to want to become a musician. What
Yeah.
was that like as a young person?
Yeah, obviously, early days of MTV were happening, and everybody was glued to the TV set when that launched in, I think, August of 81, I believe. Um, I was really glued to MTV. KROQ was a channel, 106.7 in LA, that played a lot of, like, the new wave hits of the day, and what people would call alternative now. But I just was blown away by how many bands there were from the early, to mid 80s that had, there were maybe one or two hit wonders, but there was such a volume of bands, and everybody, it was sort of a lack of self-consciousness with the groups, right? People wore what they wanted to wear. They didn't worry about it. Nobody wondered about Boy George's sexuality, or, for example, it was just an interesting look, and it was somebody doing their own thing. And so I was, interested in music hearing groups like the Human League and the Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen, and all of the one-hit, which you might title one-hit wonders, like the Vapors with Turning Japanese and Felony, I Am the Fanatic, and all of this stuff was sort of popping out in a lot of the films of the time, right? Like as we were talking about the John Hughes stuff, and 16 Candles and Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's, and there was this sort of cross section of hearing these songs on the radio and then hearing them in Pretty in Pink and going, oh, I love that Psychedelic Furs song that I'm hearing on KROQ, and now I'm hearing it behind Molly Ringwald, and in the film. And so, you would go to the movies, on the weekend in Westwood, you go to the Bruin or the Mans or the National. And I felt sort of immersed in this kind of pop culture of it's funny, right? Weird Science, you would kind of maybe turn them like sort of like teen flicks that John Hughes was making, but the filmmaking was really great. The dialogue was snappy and witty, and the music, the soundtrack was such a huge part of these films, and it sort of embedded the movie in the time and in the culture, because that's also what was going on in your life. You were hearing songs in movies, right? That you were hearing in your real life, daily kind of routine. So you kind of felt immersed in the pop culture yourself, as opposed to feeling like you're getting a window into something that you're not a part of. You kind of felt like you were mixed in with what you were watching at the theater and what you were listening to, and then you'd go see the band live in a club. I used to go to Madame Wong's West and see bands. I used to go to places that I used to that I ended up playing myself. So I think that's kind of the best way to describe it, is that I felt sort of immersed in something that was sort of mirroring even part of my own life, because then you take the experience of what a lot of these films were about, and they were teens going through what you were going through.
Right.
So I think
I mean, I
that's
grew up on those movies too in the early 2000s, so I've always had this sort of nostalgia of wishing I could experience what it was like to exist during that time. So I love the way that you put that. Were there any artists or songs that really stuck out to you or really inspired you to pursue music?
It's funny. I started playing bass after, I don't want to call it a failed attempt, but I had started taking classical guitar, and it just wasn't. Again, it wasn't hitting me in the right spot, right? Because I was listening to all of this new wave and KROQ and early MTV and all of that. So I quickly moved away from that, and I heard Fascination by the Human League on the radio, and then I saw the video, and I thought to myself, what's that sound? Like dun, 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 and this kind of knobby jazz bass sound coming through, and talking to friends, oh, that's a bass, and I play guitar, and he plays drums, so why don't you play bass? I think a lot of bass players have that scenario where the typical instrument in the band, the guitar, the keyboard, the drums, the lead vocal, that's sort of taken up already. The bass is sort of, it's available to you because
Somebody's got to
there.
play it. Somebody's got to.
Yeah.
McCartney, you play this bass thing.
Right. But what's interesting about that is that, I kind of fell in love with the instrument after it was sort of the default, mechanism at hand. And so I started to, listen for that in songs, and I started to separate the bass lines, and became a very attractive sound to me. And I started taking lessons at, Ace Music in Santa Monica on 7th Street. And I would go in, and like a lot of kids, I would come in and say, I want to learn this song, or I want to learn that song. And that's kind of how it started. But then I would learn these covers, but then I would go back, to my original band, and the singer was writing original music. So I think one of the things that I have some pride in is that at a young age, I remember sitting in my living room with the band, and the singer says, "We have to make a decision. Are we going to play covers and do like weddings and those types of occasions, or are we going to be like a band that plays original music and play clubs and do our own shows? Like there was a conscious decision to write and perform original music when I was like 13, 14 years old.
Wow.
And so I found myself playing live at, 14, 15 years old. I was playing my first live show was I was 14. It was like 1984. I played Madam Wong's West when it was on Wilshire around Yale, down in Santa Monica. I was in one band. That was the band I was the bass player in. I was the drummer in another band. We played clubs like the Anti Club and the Troubadour. So I started playing live very young. I wasn't even old enough to get into the clubs. You would do sound check, and then they'd empty the club before it opened, and I'd be like, "Oh God, am I going to get back in?"
Yeah.
It,
Well,
and yeah,
the thing, because I'm listening to Greg, a lot of people have like, it was a band, it was a song, it was an album. For you, it was like the sound of the 80s and the new wave thing. Like, not a lot of people say Missing Persons was the thing that, got me in, but it sounds like it was just all of that. And there was a lot of synth bass, I think that, was also part of it. Was there
Mhm.
any basis like, Sting or John Entwistle or, McCartney that
Yeah.
really also helped you sort of go, this is a really amazing instrument, like to get technical on?
Yeah, so it's sort of an interesting thing here. I think there was so much going on in LA in the 80s that, like you just said, it wasn't necessarily like, there were some songs that influenced me more than others, but you had all of these different cross sections happening. You had KROQ, um, you had MTV, but then you had friends that were interested in like, ooh, can this guy really play? Can he blow? Is he amazing? And you had the club, the Baked Potato on Cahuenga, where there were a lot of big time, unbelievable studio musicians that after sessions they would go play for hours at in this tiny little room, like I said, called the Baked Potato, and I used to go there all the time with friends, and we would watch these incredible players from LA and, all the session guys that played on all the records, like, Steve Lukather and John Pena and Jeff Porcaro and Vinny Colaiuta and all of these, Mike Miller on guitar and Mike Landau, all these incredible players. So I had these sort of dual worlds going on where, you know, I had the pop thing and the new wave thing from the radio and MTV, and then I'd go over the hill to the valley and see these incredible players that, maybe they did a Toto album in the day or they worked
Mhm.
on a Michael Jackson track, and then they just went in front of an audience of 50 people and just cut loose in ways that put me in my place in a lot of ways, interestingly. It was sort of like I learned a lot from those baked potato shows when I was a teen. It was like, okay, I don't really love this music that they're playing. It's sort of like music was the secondary piece to just being able to solo and show off and do that kind of thing. And so I realized from going to the baked potato that I cared about songs and
Mhm.
singer-songwriter type stuff, good lyrics, good melodies, not just sort of a progression set up to, show your chops,
But in a way, like, unlike most of us around the rest of the country, you had front row seat to the greatest musicians and the greatest artists, and to suck that in sort of to helps form you live.
Yeah.
Just before we move on from that, is there like an album or an artist like, Police, or The Cure? Was there something that was like, this makes me want to do this for a living,
Yeah.
follow that?
So the first 4 Echo and the Bunnymen albums impacted me really greatly when I was a kid. I can easily say that I was pretty obsessed with that band from like 1980 to around 1987. I saw them multiple times live. I still my favorite show ever was September 9th, 1984 at the LA Greek Theater. Billy Bragg opening solo, Flesh Tones from New York, and then Echo and the Bunnymen on the Ocean Rain tour headlining. It's still to this day my favorite show I've ever seen. Um, I think those first 4 albums, Crocodiles, Heaven Up Here, Porcupine, and Ocean Rain, were very important records to me. It's kind of why I say that it's funny that I wound up in the Wallflowers. It was the opportunity that was presented to me to do it professionally, and even though that I'm proud of the music that we made, it wasn't necessarily the style of music that I was looking to play. It's the
Hmm.
opportunity that opened up for me that I went for. But if somebody were to pull out, if the genie came out of the bottle and said, what kind of music do you want to play? What kind of band? And it would have been more
Yeah.
sort of like an English early 80s kind of, new wave post-punk type operation, I think.
Right.
I just but that band and those four records, were very influential to me.
Why? What was it about Echo? Like, I love, Killer Moon, and there's a bunch of great songs, but was it the voice? Was it the sound? The bass, or what was that about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I loved the sort of driving simplicity and of the bass. I really liked the bass player. The drummer had Pete DeFreitas had a lot of energy. There was it's sort of like the U2 thing where you immediately know who it is, and you also know that these four people are making a very specific racket that only they could make. They probably taken out of their own bands wouldn't necessarily be the people of choice, but some, the greater, what is it, the sum of its parts, are greater, and I
Yeah.
think that Echo and the Bunnymen, his voice, Ian McCulloch's voice is so unique and lofty and kind of I don't want to say operatic, but he definitely had a big voice, and I think they just really struck me as just a very original sound. They're very singular to me. I hear them, and it's
Mhm.
very influential to a lot of other bands. They're still very influential. Um, I don't know. There was a sort of melding of the dark wave and the new wave, and they had a way of being catchy, but yet it wasn't too poppy. You know,
Yeah,
there was a
very well said.
there was a melancholy to what they were doing. So it was
Mysterious. It's kind of
yeah, yeah,
stark darkness.
and I liked the juxtaposition as well, which I think we did kind of carry over, and funnily enough, into the Wallflowers. It's just sort of like ability to have music that has a bounce and kind of happiness to it, with a vocal that kind of counters that a bit, right? So
Mm.
I kind of like the juxtaposition of what they were about. Um,
Very
That's
cool.
right up my alley, and I have to admit I don't really know this band, so
oh boy,
I'm gonna go discover them.
what I'd give to just hear those first four records for the first time right now,
Right?
and
Oh
they
my god.
still last really, well through time. So I think you'll enjoy that quartet of albums big time.
Ooh,
Yeah,
okay, I'm so excited.
yeah,
I love discovering new music,
yeah.
and I love what you have to say about the Wallflowers and how it
Mhm.
wasn't exactly your genre that you ended up being a part of. I think that's so interesting. So, let's just go back a little bit to the origin of how you got involved with this band, which
Mm.
dates way back to your time living in LA as a teenager, and you went to high school with Jacob Dylan. How did you guys meet and hit it off?
Yeah, I think I'd maybe been at the school uh, for a year before he got there. So maybe I think if I'm remembering correctly, I got there in the eighth grade. He got to Windward in the ninth grade, and we just kind of everybody kind of knew, like, oh, there's a kid coming, his dad's a musician, But the funny thing is, I wasn't really like, oh, Bob Dylan. I wasn't really a Bob Dylan fan at 15 years old, 14 years old. I just wasn't in my world, right? Up against everything that we just talked about, I was listening to. Um, but we hit it off because we had a mutual love of music. So during lunches, after we became friendly, we would go in his car and listen to the Waterboys and the Del Fuegos and the Bodines and Los Lobos, and we kind of had a fondness for those types of bands. And then it kind of morphed into, hey, Greg, I just messing around on guitar and coming up with this musical demo at home. Do you want to come over and play bass and maybe a little drums on it? So I would go over to his house here and there, and we would just mess around on his 4-track and build these instrumentals. And that was sort of the extent of our relationship at the time. We hung out at lunch, we listened to music, we would do some recording together on the weekends or after school. But it was only until you know they fired their first bass player and I'd gotten out of college that they'd reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to try out for the band?" So
Mhm.
I was actually, what really happened was I went out to a club on La Brea called the Three of Clubs with a girlfriend of mine, and I wasn't wearing the right shoes apparently, and I was having trouble getting in, and the bouncer was giving me a really hard time, and I was
I
starting
that
to
happened
argue.
to me as a teenager in LA
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, yeah. He was like, "Hey, you can't wear those Docs," or whatever it was, right? And I was sort of getting into it with him, and right as that was happening, a friend of mine came out of the club and said, "Hey, you got to call Toby Miller, who was the guitar player in the band." He's like, "You got to call Toby. The band's going on the road in a week, and Barry's not in the band anymore." So he walked me up to McDonald's and put me on the payphone, and I called Toby, and he was like, "Hey, we're trying out bass players behind the whiskey at Ivy's garage tomorrow. We've already got a couple people that have come down, so you better hurry." So I went down the next day and rehearsed with them, and I did well, and I got the gig. So that's kind of how it happened. But yeah, I mean, it started from just being high school friends and being interested in music and listening to music together. And one day you're at your job and you,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
Greg, I'm just going to say that's not normal. Just that you went
Okay.
to school with Jacob Dylan, hanging out with Bob's son, and ended up in this band. It's amazing. Like, I know it's for you, it's your life, but when you hear it, it's like
Mhm.
that's so incredible. The odds of that.
Yeah. Well, it's not lost on me, and I'm grateful for everything that I got to do with them, for sure. You know what I mean? I want to make it clear that just because I grew up in LA around people like that, uh, I don't take it for granted, and I don't. I realize, for every million people that are trying to do it, maybe one or two get to experience it at that level. So I definitely appreciate everything that we got to do
Yeah. I like what
together.
you said though, because growing up in LA, it really just skews your sense of what's normal. Like, I would just see celebrities in my neighborhood, or my
Mm.
dad took me to see American Idol, like, just things that were always cool, but they didn't not as cool as I realized they were when I met people from the middle of nowhere later in life.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, I think you know, we're just sort of a product of our environment, whether we like it or not, right? And it's like I could have just as easily grown up in LA and just happened to not go to school with anybody whose parents were in entertainment. It just sort of went that way, um, and you know I got involved, and I think I think my interests kind of went in that direction because it was partly what I was exposed to. Hey, have you heard this band? Or um, and I definitely think that the opportunities are there, but you have to seize the opportunity. You
Yes.
have to make something of it. You can't. It's I think one of my greater assets is that I think if I were to have to toot my own horn and say what is a strength of yours, I would say that I'm pretty good at follow through. I'm pretty, I'm somebody that doesn't like a lot of open books. I don't like a lot of things. I don't like starting things and not finishing them. It's sort of
Mm.
a little bit of an OCD thing. It grates on
Mm.
me. I like to kind of finish what I started. you
That's a
know.
I
great
want to
thing.
Yeah.
I wanted
Mm.
to just drill down, Greg, a little bit on Jacob. Did you know, like, as when you were a teenager, you play with a lot of people, knowing that he was Bob Dylan's son, which had to be a little intimidating to play with Bob Dylan's son? I don't know. Maybe it wasn't for you, but it sounds like it might have been. Well, did you know, like, there was extreme talent coming out of that? And did you feel like I'm hearing a little Bob in this? Or, what do you think, sort of how it
You
happened?
know, the truth of the matter is that I really wasn't kind of I hate to say it, but I really wasn't that interested in, you know, what Bob Dylan was doing at the time. It was only afterwards that I went, "Oh, Infidels is a great record," and "Oh, I love Oh Mercy." Um, at the time, it was just more like, "This is my friend from school." Um, I'm enjoying these instrumentals that he's kind of allowing me to partake in. There, I remember he had a phaser, pedal, and he had some really interesting melody lines going. And I thought to myself, wow, this is, really interesting stuff. Like I thought he was talented and I thought he had a real knack for melody. But you have to remember he hadn't committed to wanting to be a singer and front a band at that point. These were just instrumentals. He wasn't singing on them. He wasn't writing lyrics. This was like
Mm, okay.
drum machine, bass, rhythm guitar with some, really cool kind of guitar melodies that, could have been sung if he were into that at the time. But yeah, that, I didn't put it up against Bob, or I wasn't intimidated by anything. His father was always on the road anyway. He was never around when
Yeah.
I was. So it was more just a friend of mine that I knew came from a pretty serious musical background, but he himself was still kind of dipping his toes at that point. So it was not a pressurized
Or
situation. It was just
what
kind of
what
fun, you know.
what do you do you know if Bob taught him how to play and sing at all, or was it just literally he just like, hey, my dad's in this, I'm going to try to do this as well?
I just think, you know, I don't think his dad really, I'm not quite sure, but I get the impression that Jacob just kind of picked it up on his own and, started playing guitar, maybe took some lessons and, started getting into things himself. I don't think he had a lot of coaching. I mean, again, Bob was, they call it the never ending tour for a reason,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I've met
Yeah.
him a few times in the 20 some years, 30 some years I've known him. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think he just kind of took the reins himself. There was not a lot of here. Let me show you how to do
Yeah,
this.
it wasn't like a baseball dad who's like, "I'm gonna teach you how to pitch." He
Right.
just but there's obviously probably natural talent in his voice and his songwriting that just
Mhm.
by being around it, you probably learn.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think his dad was definitely would show up at the baseball games and watch, but I don't think he was. I think when you have a parent like that, this is just my guess, right? I'm not saying this is true or not. I'm just saying this is my take after all that time. I think that when you have a parent that's that ingrained in the music world and is that revered, I think you can always go to that person for advice, but I think you're also careful to kind of understand that you want to carve out your own identity from under that. So I
Right.
think my intuition on that subject would be that I'm sure he was there for advice if he needed it, but I don't think he was trying to sort of hitch his trailer to any sort of artistic,
yeah.
pointers or things like that. It's
I'm
more
Well,
business.
curious if there was any part of you that was approaching this with a potential opportunity in your mind, you know? Like, were
Mm.
you at all like, "This is networking. This is my friend, but he also has a really successful dad. This could help me in my career," or was that just not even on your radar?
It really wasn't actually because I didn't know where anything was really headed. When I got asked to do that tour, I thought, okay, I'm leaving this job at TriStar, which is a good job, and I was gonna, work my way up the ladder on the film TV production side of things. But I knew that going on this tour would afford me, the ability to know what it's like to do something at the highest level. Record out on Virgin, bands in a real tour bus, staying in hotels, opening for 10,000 Maniacs, playing, open air venues, big places, big theaters. Um, I really just kind of took it step by step. I wasn't kind of plotting out my life. It was very incremental in that regard. You know, I just thought I'm going to see what it's like to go out there and really do it after all these years of being in, bands in high school and in college. I'd done about 10 years of indie bands. And then when I got that gig, that was the first opportunity that I knew I was really going to have to see what it was like to do this at like the highest level. And then it was only about halfway through the tour that the band called me into the back lounge one day. I was standing in the bunk area, and one of the guys said, "Hey, come back here. We got to talk to you." And I went in the back lounge, and the whole band was back there. And they said, "Hey, how do you feel about joining the band full time, becoming a member?" And I was like, "Really? Sure, great." And everyone's like, "Woo!" It was like,
Yeah.
jumping up and down, kind of. It was a moment of celebration because I didn't know that that's where it was headed. I just was like, they fired someone, they needed somebody to cover. I covered. I had no idea that in the middle of this tour they were going to hire me full time. Nor did I know that after that moment that it was going to be 20 years of my life in that band.
Yeah.
So to be honest with you, I never looked. It was like more like answering the call, like a friends in need, right? Hey, we got a tour starting in 7 days. You got to go learn 30 songs and bail us out. It was more me feeling like I was helping them than myself at the time, and then it just kind of kept going.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Life takes you in, and that's what this podcast is all about, the crazy twists and turns of life. I do have to get back to one thing on Dylan that I heard you say, that
Mhm.
you did have an interaction with him once, and he
Mhm.
came backstage and he said something pretty profound to you that kind of blew you away. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, what was interesting is that before Bringing Down the Horse came out, the label wanted us to get out on the road and become a good live band, and the only way you can do that is getting out there in front of people. So in October of '95, we had a tour opening for Chris Isaak. He had the big hit,
Yep, I know.
what's the yeah, yeah.
The one,
I
yes.
wanna fall in
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Wicked Heart, right?
Wick, wick,
Wicked Game.
wicked game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we got the gig to open for them, and that tour lasted from like October to the beginning of January of '96. So October '95 to January '96. And when we pulled into LA on that tour, we were doing 2 nights at the Pantages, and Bob had come down to see the band, but I hadn't seen him. So I think it was like after the first show. I can't remember which of the two. After the show, opening for Chris, I went back on the bus to change out of my wet clothes and get into something more comfortable and go watch Chris. And I was on the bus, pulling out my shirt, and Jacob was like, "Hey, my dad wants to talk to you." And I was like, "Why?" It was almost like I was like nervous about it more than
Yeah.
excited, right? I was like, "What did I
Dad
do?"
wants to talk to you.
Uh-oh,
My total.
and so I, got dressed and went down the stairs and out into the side of the bus, and right next to the door, he was standing. Bob was standing talking to our manager, Andy, and I was standing across from them. And it was like 20 seconds of them talking. I was standing there, nothing was happening, and I was like, you know, felt a
Does he
little
really?
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, he just looked over at me and put his hand out and shook my hand and said, "I like what you're doing." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much." And then I was like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go." And I turned around and I walked into the Pantages, and I remember thinking, I was like, "Whoa, wow, whoa," on the way back in. And I just kind of remember thinking to myself, like, well, Bob thinks I'm doing pretty well, so I guess, that's the only vote of
Uh,
confidence I need there, right? Like if Bob Dylan says he likes what you're doing,
oh my
maybe you're doing
God.
something right.
You know what's funny? With a man who's
Yeah.
so poetic and has so much to say in his lyrics, he kept it very simple.
Hmm.
I like what you're doing. But
Right.
my God, that's like, being touched by, you know, rock royalty,
Yeah.
an icon. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it
Well,
was cool.
as I'm listening to you tell us about your journey and, starting out as a kid in Santa Monica, just not even knowing this is what you wanted to do. And then you have this incredible run of success and Grammys and music videos and touring. Like, is it, for all of us, that anybody who dreamed of being a rock star, is the reality as exciting for you? Was it, and as like mind blowing as, you would think, or was it like, it's hard and it's not as exciting as we all think it would be?
It was very exciting. I mean, I remember the first time I heard myself on the radio when Sixth Avenue came on. I remember who I was with, what car I was in, what street I was on, where
Where
I
was
was
it?
Well, I had a Ford F-150. My friend Danny Sidlow was with me. We were at Highland and Wilshire about to go have breakfast, and Sixth Avenue kicked on, and it was like, oh my God, it was an amazing feeling, hearing yourself on the radio for the first time. So, um, I it was exciting. I mean, we did Letterman probably 12 times. We did Leno. We did Conan, Kilborn, Fallon, Rosie O'Donnell. Uh, we did so many show. We did some Oxygen Network show for Oprah. We did who's the one who's off air now? That had a big talk show.
Oh, Ellen DeGeneres.
Yeah, we did Ellen. We did all these late night shows and opened for incredible bands like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the Rolling Stones, the Who.
Let's talk. Let's break
Clapton.
that down. Let's break that down, because I heard some of the stories. Like you say it, and I know you're so much you guys did, but when you stop and say we warmed up for the Who, the Stones, Clapton, Springsteen. So just a couple of these. The Springsteen story, I think, is pretty fantastic. That you guys spent the day with Springsteen and play with him. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, so we were in the middle of one of the club tours for Bringing Down the Horse. It was probably around 1997, and in the middle of the tour, Jacob came to us and said, "Springsteen's people got reached out to us. He wants to have the band over to the house and hang out, and then he wants to take you to the venue and play some songs in your encore." And we were like, okay, sounds great. So, sure enough, the day came where we pulled into New Jersey, and at 2 o'clock he was picking us up in his dually pickup in front of the hotel, and we all piled in. I sat shotgun, and the rest of the guys were in the back, and we were driving to his house, and he was showing us points of interest, over here, oh, in the high school, and over there, and that was like kind of a moment, like, where you say, like, wow, I'm sitting shotgun in Bruce Springsteen's truck as he's driving me to his house. You
It's
do
right out
have
of a
those.
Springsteen song, man. It's right out. I
Yeah.
was in Bruce's pickup truck.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly. So, he was really just a nice guy and funny and likable, and we got to his house and we all walked in and we said hi to Patty, and there was a little baby in the living room, and there was a chef that had made lunch, and we all grabbed our plates, and we got our salads and whatever else, fish and pasta, whatever they had made, a big nice lunch for everyone. And we sit down, and I was sitting there talking to Bruce about, a lot of musicians like to say, like, how long, can you be out on the road before you start going crazy, and we were kind of talking about the 3-week mark was kind of the barometer, and then all of a sudden Sting walks in with Trudy, his wife, and sits at the other side of the table. We had no idea that he was there. So it was like, whoa, so yeah. So,
Pinch
Sting
me really hard right there.
Yeah, right. It was crazy. So basically, Sting and Bruce had become friends through doing the Amnesty International shows together. So Sting was staying in Bruce's back guest house, Sting and Trudy, because Sting was doing like 5 nights at the Paramount. So instead of staying in a hotel, he was staying with his pal Bruce and pals Bruce and Patty, and just shuttling to his shows at night. So he gave us, after lunch and after a nice conversation with everybody, Bruce gave us a tour of the grounds. So we got to see, his horse stables, and we went to another house that was about a block away. It was like a full house, but it had it's where he had his recording studio. We would do a lot of demos. And, so we saw the bedrooms upstairs. So, people would go record there and they could stay upstairs. And then we went back to the barn. And earlier in the day, there was a guy walking a horse around like a corral, like a kind of a circle, and it had become apparent, Bruce said, that the horse had colic. It had like something stuck in its intestines, and the only way that they can get that out is by, walking the horse around and trying to get this, these rocks or dirt or whatever is stuck in the horse's intestines out. And it's a pretty serious thing that, if they don't get this out, like, the horse could die. So after we look at the horses, we go into this little room and we have some licorice tequila and a Corona, and we kind of make a toast. Hey, let's have some fun tonight. At the gig. And we walk back outside, and he's like, "Oh, let me show you the stables." So we walk over to the stables, and the horse that was being pulled around in circles to kind of try and get over the colic is, we turn the corner, and the horse is in a stall, and the guy that's working with the horse has a glove on, and his hand is completely in the rear end of the horse, trying to massage this obstruction out of the horse. And everybody turns the corner and sees that, and I just said, "Tour's over, Bruce." He must have laughed 10 minutes.
Oh my God. And then you guys
Yeah.
then you guys played with them that night, right? Didn't you end up?
Yes, and then he literally drove us to Tradewinds Club in New Jersey and sound checked a bunch of songs with us. And then Sting came down too. John Bon Jovi came down. Levon Helm came down. And, we did our set. And then at a certain point, we called up Bruce, we called up John, and we called up Levon. And for some reason, we forgot to call Sting up. We were so kind of out of sorts.
Whoops.
He was standing there watching, but we didn't. I was like, "Oh my God, we forgot to invite Sting up." What the hell were we thinking? But that's okay. You know what?
You would have to give up your bass though. Like, hey, that would have been great. Sting, here, play my bass.
Yeah. He might have. Maybe he needed to take over on bass, or he would have stood there and done background vocals. But we just kind of completely overlooked that. But we did covers with, the coolest part was before we were about to go out, Bruce was like, "Hey, let's do that one off your record, God Don't Make Lonely Girls." And we were all, for years, we were like, Bruce knows the deep cuts. He knows track 9, It was kind of funny, So
that's great.
And I thought it was really neat that, he wanted to come out and play with us and do a song of ours that, was on the record that wasn't necessarily like the hit. We had done that with them on I think the MTV Awards.
That is a day we will never forget. That it just, I'm sure like the young kid in you is just going, I can't believe I'm sitting here backing up Bruce Springsteen. I mean, and another one you backed up, you said, was Tom Petty. I mean, I am a huge Tom Petty fan. I was at the second to last show, the Hollywood Bowl. I was devastated. And so like, thinking back to, that we've lost him, but that you got to tour with that band is just remarkable, and you get to sing with them. You said,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we went out and opened for them. It was a little bit of a difficult time for them. Howie was struggling with his substance abuse, and you could tell something was very wrong, but nobody was really talking about it. And that was during the Echo album that they put out around, I want to say it was around 2001. Had songs like Room at the Top and Swingin'. Kind of a dark but interesting album. So we did a bunch of sheds with them on that tour, and we really had a great time. I think we kind of modeled ourselves after the Heartbreakers in a lot of ways, coming from LA. I was, again, you want to talk about pinch me moments that aren't lost on you. I was a 16-year-old kid at the LA Forum in the audience watching, the Southern Accents tour that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers did, and just as a fan. So to kind of be there opening for them and hanging out with them backstage. And I think the last show that we did with them, we got to come out and, I huddled around Scott Thurston, their utility guy, and we did background vocals on American Girl, so to be able to stand up there and do that at the end of a tour, which is sort of mirrors what we did, in 2013, I believe it was, we opened for Eric Clapton. And the last show that we did on that tour, we asked him if he would come out and cover The Weight by the band and play guitar and sing. And he did. And he literally stood right next to me. And
Mm.
I had excuse my French, but I had a shit-eating grin on my face. It's on YouTube. People comment like, "Look at the bass player. Look how happy he is." And it's
I'm
true.
sure you
It's
had
like I
a.
couldn't, yeah, couldn't hide it.
I'm sure you had so many of those. Last question for me about this run of sort of your amazing success. Um, what were there any couple other stories of just late night revelry, being in a studio, anything that was just like wasn't with the Wallflowers, but or was with the Wallflowers that you just you've never told, or you just it's a
Mm.
great story that you
Oh
just never
boy.
forgot, like Prince jamming one night at his house, just anything like that. I always curious about.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, during our recording, uh, hmm,
I
I don't
think.
know. I
All right.
think I think when we were in the studio, everything was pretty okay. If we were going to have somebody come in and do background vocals, it was pretty mapped out. Like, hey, Frank Black's coming down today, or Gary Lewis from the Jayhawks is coming in to sing today, or Sam Phillips or Michael Penn. I'm trying to think. I mean, if there was anything really off the cuff,
Or just crazy road stories, like with another one, like with another band or
yeah.
anything.
Um, Gosh, I mean, one of the things that sticks out is sort of something that was a moment of happiness. I remember when we were mixing Sixth Avenue Heartache at Record One, and I walked in the room, and sitting next to T-Bone Burnett was Jim Keltner, the drummer, who's played with like every Beatle, you know, Joe Cocker. He's just an incredible drummer, and somebody that I really looked up to. And I remember just being so nervous that he was sitting there listening to the track. And I guess he had leaned over to Jacob at one point and said, "Hey, he and Matt are really grooving." Matt Chamberlain was the drummer, and Jake kind of gave me he kind of hit me in the leg, like, "You hear that?" So it's like one of
Nice.
those moments, when Keltner kind of gave his approval of how the song was feeling. Again, those things kind of mattered more to me than, in a weird way, being sort of around a famous person or something. It was like,
Hmm.
this guy drummed on, Steely Dan and, John Lennon records, and he's sitting in here going, "Hey, these guys sound great." That kind of approval is kind of exciting. You know,
Yeah, you're a real musician's musician. Yep.
exactly.
So after such a successful, incredible 20-year run with the Wallflowers, you decided to leave the band. And
Mm.
what led you to that decision?
Well, again, the business had changed such that um, groups found themselves having to be out on the road a lot more to make money because record sales kind of dried up when Napster hit, and the money from that side of things was no longer. And my son was 8 at the time, and I just felt like I got to do something else. I don't want to just be out here on the road sitting in hotel rooms missing him growing up, especially when the returns weren't quite what they used to be. And I just started to kind of have that feeling inside, like, I think this is time to do something else. I kind of felt like, not to sound again ungrateful, but it's actually quite the opposite. I think a lot of people have problems getting off the train because they think, well, this is what I'm known for. Or I'm the guitar player in this famous band, or I'm the bass player in this famous band, and that's what people know me, and they have a hard time getting off the train. I kind of felt like, man, like, I've done Letterman 12 times. I've toured the world. We've won Grammys. Our songs are on the radio. We've sold 10 million albums. Like, I don't know what is left to do
But
other
while
than
you're
more of
ahead,
what
I
I've already
guess.
done. So I kind of those having accomplished so much was actually the thing that made it easy for me to go, I want to try something else now. I don't want to just keep doing the same thing. Um, Especially just, given how the business had changed. I felt like it went from a business that worked, right? Like, you had a budget, you went in the studio, you made a record, they promoted it, you went out, people bought the album, they came to the show. It felt like a business model that was working. And I know that, things are different now, and people are figuring things out and getting more used to the fact, that streaming's here, and figuring out, and all the social media, and a lot of artists are basically taking it upon themselves to create these like kind of deep, narrow verticals, like a Cohan or a, all these artists that, a lot of people don't know, but can sell out, like the Hollywood Bowl, but your parents might go, I've never heard of this person, right? It's a much different world now. But I think that I felt comfortable leaving because I felt like I had done everything there was to do and I'd done it over and over again. And I just kind of looked at it like that, hey, it's time for something new. It's time to be around the house more and see my son grow up and maybe get back to this filmmaking thing that I abandoned a long time ago.
Right.
So that's sort of, how I tackled it. Yeah.
Before we dive into more of the film side, what are your top 3 favorite Wallflower songs,
Oh boy.
if you can?
Yeah, well, I'd have to say, obviously, One Headlight is one of them. It's the song that kind of put us over the top, but I also just have fond memories of recording a very simple demo at our original guitar player's house in 1994, which was just me programming Four on the Floor on a Dr. Beat drum machine, playing the bass line essentially that I ended up playing on the album, and then Jacob singing and playing acoustic guitar. That was the demo. I may be I probably am the only person that still has a copy of that. Nobody's heard it. It's the only copy it's the only thing that exists other than the studio version that everyone knows. But I would say One Headlight because after we did that demo, I remember saying to Toby and Jacob, I said, "This is the song that's going to do it for us." I had that moment where I went, "This is it." I knew from that 4-track demo that this song was going to have a big impact.
Mm.
Very few times in your life do those types of things happen where you go, "That's going to take off," and it did. A lot of times you
Always
think,
amazing.
"That's
It's
going
one
to
of the
take." Yeah.
And it's always amazing is one of the first songs people do becomes their biggest hit or, like that happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, in the case of the Wallflowers, a lot of people just don't know that they had a record that sold about 40,000 copies at the time on Virgin that the label kind of looked at as a failure, in large part due to the fact that Jacob wasn't going to sell himself out and do hard copy and people and, ride on his father's name. He didn't want to go down that road. And I think there was some frustration on the part of the label, that they couldn't get him to do certain types of promo that they thought would, push sales, but to him it was, trading in on his name, which he was never going to do. So, yeah,
Okay.
that
How about the other two?
I would have to say another song that has always sort of lived with me is a song called Three Ways off Red Letter Days. It's not a hit. It's just a meaningful song to me lyrically because it reflected some of the difficulties that we were having as a band at the time. Um, the lyrics sort of like there's 3 ways out of every box, fall out the bottom or you crawl out the top, but the last way is that you can always just kind of burn it down. You can just they just forget it, like just burn it down, start over. This isn't working, So I always I would actually kind of get a lump in my throat at times when I would hear that song because for me, I really felt how he was writing about something that we were really going through. At least that's how I took it. He might have written it for a whole other reason, but I don't think so. That it's always impacted me. And another song, I mean, a song that I'm proud of on Rebel Sweetheart, a record that we did in 2005 with Brendan O'Brien, is a song called God Says Nothing Back. I just really liked the groove on that I did with the drummer at the time, Fred Altringham. They were having trouble figuring out some picking parts when we were recording that. And what was kind of interesting was Brendan O'Brien just said, "You and Fred just go out there and do it." And somehow miraculously, the two of us, with all of them staring at us through the glass, got through the entire arrangement of the song with Jacob not singing it, like it was by memory. And it was just a great groove that I'm pretty proud of, and I think the lyrics are interesting. It's a little bit of a darker song, but it has a cool kind of rolling kind of tom figure. And I think I might have to do a couple more, but there's a song called Health and Happiness that I like on Red Letter Days as well. And what else? I don't know. There's a lot. I mean, the new record I'm most proud of, Glad All Over, that came out in 2012, which was the last record I did with the band. I had a big part in the sort of homage to The Clash, the first single called Reboot the Mission. I kind of came in with a bass line that was sort of taking the bass line of the Magnificent Seven from the Clash's 1980 album Sandinista and kind of turning it up on its head and creating sort of a line that harkened back to that sound but was sort of its own thing. And then we upped the ante by really making it a Clash homage by inviting Mick Jones from the Clash to play guitar and sing
Wow.
background. So
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
awesome.
I say Reboot the Mission and Misfits and Lovers are the two songs on the last album I did with the band that Mick Jones is on that I'm very proud of.
Well, you've truly lived the rock and roll dream, my friend. It's pretty
Well,
amazing to hear it.
It was a lot of fun, only good memories, but
Good.
but now I'm making movies with our friend Jack Pyatt and others. So,
Well, that's the perfect transition because I wanted to talk about The Immediate Family a little bit, which, for those who don't know, is an incredible documentary about the session musicians who were so iconic in the 70s. And obviously, our producer is Jack Pyatt, who also produced that film. And we also were very lucky to interview Denny Tedesco a few weeks ago as well. So I'm loving all these connections, but I want to hear from you what it was like working on this film.
Well, I think this is always going to go down as like a dream project for me, like for the rest of my life. I think that growing up in LA, as we discussed, these guys were, and we're referring to the subjects of the Immediate Family film. So Danny Korchmar, Russ Kunkel, Leland Sklar, Waddy Wachtel, and then the newer guy, Steve Postel, who, would handle guitar and vocals additionally for them. These guys were sort of the next wave of the Wrecking Crew in the singer-songwriter era. So coming out of the 60s, coming out of the Wrecking Crew, the singer-songwriters started to bring in musicians that they knew that were actually good, capable players. And these songwriters were not relying on the session players of the 50s and 60s Wrecking Crew era, like the Carol Kays and the Hal Blaines and the Plas Johnsons of that era. Carole King was walking in saying, "Hey, hi Lou Adler, I'm going to make this record, and Danny Korchmar, who's a great guitar player, is along with me." And so it sort of became a little bit more of a thing where artists were bringing in players that they liked, and that was the next wave after the Wrecking Crew were players like that. And so we had the idea to do this film because at the end of the Wrecking Crew, they kind of hint at things to come with the singer-songwriter era, and that the Wrecking Crew was sort of not working quite as much because of the songwriters coming in with their own players and building their own cast of characters, so this started, interestingly, out of the ashes of a project that Jack Pyatt, who you referenced, who's the one of the other producers on the film, me, Jack, and my partner Jonathan Sheldon, made the record. Sorry, the movie. The way that this came about was we decided not to do a documentary with another artist that I won't bring up the name, but it was proving to be a difficult project, and I had been on the phone with a friend of mine named Lisa Roy about this other project because I was trying to get to Paul McCartney for an interview. And she said, "Okay, well, I'll try and work on that." And then a couple weeks later, I called her and I said, "Hey, you don't have to reach out. Jack and I have decided to not move forward with this project." And I said, "But Denny was going to direct this thing, and I love Denny Tedesco's, Wrecking Crew, and gosh, I'd really love to find a way to work with him." And Lisa Roy just happened to be very big in the PR world in music. So she does a lot of PR for a lot of gear companies. And she was the PR for the Immediate Family. who were a band at the time. And she said to me, "Well, what if we do a documentary on the Session?" And the Session was, an early '70s group of these guys that put 3 albums out. So it was Russ Kunkel, Lee Sklar, Danny Korchmar, and a keyboard player named Craig Durgee. So Waddy wasn't a part of that. And she said, "Well, what if we do, a documentary on the Session, the Section?" And then I said, "Well, what if we make it about the relationship between those guys and their career together and apart, and we kind of tell that whole story, not just that'll be a segment of the film, but maybe we blow it up into like these guys coming to LA, meeting, playing on all these singer-songwriter records together." um, she thought that was sort of a good twist on what she had brought to the table. And then Jack went to Denny because Jack was the one who really kind of knew Denny. I didn't know Denny yet. Jack was the one that had that connection and sort of brought this idea up of like, hey, these 4 session players are a band now called Immediate Family, and they did all this work together with Jackson Browne and uh, Linda Ronstadt and Carole King and all of James Taylor. Um, and Denny really responded to the idea because of the sort of brotherhood, the family component to the film, right? That there was a group of guys that had known each other for over 50 years. They're like family now. Um, that was really, I think, what drew Denny in, was that aspect of like the brotherhood, because it was something that, that he noticed sort of in his Italian upbringing. Everybody kind of, the family component to it really drew him in. So that's kind of how the Immediate Family started. And then, yeah,
Well,
Danny Korchmar, basically, then we went out to dinner. Jack and I went out to dinner with Danny, and he said, "What do you want me to do?" And we said, "Well, we want you to call all your famous friends and, tell them, hey, they're turning the spotlight on your musicians and telling our story now. Would you, do an interview?" And so I think within the first week, Danny had reached out to James Taylor, Carole King, Linda Ronstadt, and Jackson Browne, and they all agreed to do interviews. And we had to quickly come up with a little bit of money, and we started filming. And Carole King and Laurel Canyon was the first interview we did.
I mean, the list of folks that are in this film, and it's about, Don Henley, Jackson Browne, Warren Zevon, the list goes on and on. It's a great doc. I hope everybody will watch it. It's on Hulu. And it really, you guys, I have to say, it's an incredible story that most people don't know. And it leads us to sort of, as we're winding down, Greg, this has been just, thank you first of all for all your time and for your great
Of course.
stories and your career memories. I
I
always
hope I was succinct.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
No, like there's so much to cover. It's hard to
Yeah.
just sort of like, hey, I did this and I did this.
Yeah.
You just, your life and your career is so rich, and you're making other films. We know A Collective Soul. That's another film that people should go see. I just, as I sit back and think about, I've been thinking about your career this last, week as I've been prepping and researching and then hearing you. And I love to, put your headspace back in, it's 15-year-old you in Santa Monica, picking up the bass, playing some clubs, and then where this journey has taken you, 20 years in a really successful band, playing on stage with Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty, winning Grammys, all that. How does it sort of like, now looking back, how did this happen to you? I mean, and do you just sort of, I don't even know how you sort of sum up how lucky you are.
Right. Well, I think that is the summation. I feel like, they say, right, it's like, luck and, being prepared to handle, something, right? Because you can have the luck, but you have to be able to do the thing that you're there to do. I think I paid attention to opportunities that sounded interesting to me, but, again, you don't always know where they're going to lead, right? And there's a lot of decision making along the way that goes into these things. And I just think that, I seized the opportunity at the right moments. Certain things just sounded like, and this could be really, this could be an interesting ride. Let's see where this goes. But I think something that I've realized is that, I don't, when I look back on the things that went well, they weren't necessarily because I planned it or I plotted something or it just I think I found myself in a situation where I've had opportunities present themselves to me and I've taken those opportunities and made the most of what I could, when I went through it. So it was like, hey, I had this opportunity to take the gig with the band. I could have just said, nah, I'm gonna stay at TriStar. But I was like, you know what? This could be really interesting. I think I'm gonna go for it. So I think it's like this idea of like kind of jumping into the unknown
Yeah.
and accepting that you might crash and burn. It might go, just sort of like this is going to sound strange, but I say this to people all the time. It's like a Buddhist type thing, right? It's like you go into a sandbox and you reach down with both hands and you grab the sand, right? If you squeeze really hard, oh God, what's going to happen? Oh God, I really want this to happen. God, I really hope it goes
Hmm.
this way. It starts to slip through your fingers, the harder you squeeze. But if you just walk into that sandbox and you pick up the sand and you got it in your hands and you're just kind of cupping it and it's in there and you're just kind of lightly holding it, like nothing seeps out of your hands, and
You know, but I'll just lastly say, Greg, like, but the difference is people take opportunities, but you guys hit it. You were the right. You not just took an opportunity, you took these opportunities, and you got talent and luck
Mhm.
and timing, and you lived this. You got to experience that success, and
Yeah,
that is, as you look back on your life and career, I have to think you're very grateful.
yeah.
Thanksgiving. Let's just leave it
Oh
at that.
yeah, absolutely grateful because I'll conclude with this, Bill Gross from Idea Lab did a very interesting TED Talk, and the number one thing that he was talking about that was influential in whether something succeeded or not, especially in business, he had to chalk it up to number one being timing. And so I can't overlook the fact that I did all the preparation to be able to go and make those records what they were with the band and make these great albums that we were proud of. But then everything had to line up, right? The record label had to do its job. Everybody had to get behind the album. They had to push it to radio. The song had to react, So there are a lot of things that I've done in my life that we could talk 2 hours on that maybe even I had more, passion and drive and willingness
Hmm.
to see it succeed than it did. And I'll always be proud of this record I produced or that record or this film or that TV show, but it just didn't happen the same way. Some things happen that way and others don't. And I think that's the timing of it all is that every now and
Yeah.
then, you catch lightning in a bottle, everything lines up and it's special and you have to kind of celebrate that it went well that time because you could point to 10, 20 other things that didn't go that way.
I just have the last thing we'll leave you on. Are your friend and mine, Bill Appleberry,
Mm.
is actually here, and he just wrote something on the chat. I want to read this to you.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Bob Dylan said nice things, and so has who was the other person that said a lovely thing? Keltner. Uh, Bill said Greg is an amazing player and an all-around great musician. Always solid, always there to hold it down. Love his incredible ear in the studio. Also, very much appreciate his talent and very grateful for the experience we shared together. Love you, brother.
Wow. Well, coming from him, that means a heck of a lot. So if you hear me, Bill, thank you for that. And I could say the same thing right back at Bill. I mean, I mean this. He's an incredible talent. I don't really know that there's many people out there like him. He's an unbelievable piano player. He's an unbelievable programmer. He's an incredible mixer. He's an incredible engineer. It's no surprise that he's so sought after. And it's hard to get a dinner in with him because somebody who mixes 500-600 songs a year is a little
Yes.
busy. But
And
he's a great guy, as you're
and a
about to
great guy.
say, right?
Yeah.
He's a
Yeah.
fantastic
He's a
guy.
terrific guy. We're going to just keep gushing about you, Bill.
Yeah,
Um,
his wife's
I
great.
also love
I
Bill.
hope to see him soon. I too in conclusion, I too look back very fondly on making Red Letter Days with him. It's still one of my favorite things that I ever did with the Wallflowers. It's cutting edge. It's
Mhm.
He pushed us in ways other people didn't. He introduced, bits of modern technology that we hadn't played around with, and used it in ways that I thought really enhanced the material, and wasn't just like, oh, the rock band trying to be modern. It was like
Mhm.
done in a very classy way. And I'll always have fond memories of working with Bill, and hopefully I'll get to work with him again in some capacity again.
Thank you. Love you, Bill. Thank you
Yeah,
for coming and for the kind words. Greg, I think we've said it all. I think you've nailed it, and we thank you so much for the time, for your incredible memories, and congratulations on what a career, and to many great success with the film career as well.
thank you. I really appreciate that. It was a lot of fun. I know it's a lot to cover, so you feel like you're jumping around, but I hope I landed everything for
We
you.
got yeah. We didn't even get to talk about Pee Wee Herman. I'll talk to you about that
Oh,
off stage.
man.
But as yours
Yeah,
as Pee Wee's assistant, that was the one thing I want to talk about. Anyway,
yeah.
that great to meet you, my friend. We'll talk to you
Thank you
Great
soon.
so
meeting you
much,
too,
Greg.
both of you. And I'm around. You got my email. I'll pump this out to my
Well, I'll let you know how
people.
I enjoy those records.
Please do. I'll expect that. It's a very important little catalog to me, so I'd love to hear how you take to it.
I
Love
gotcha.
it. All right.
Great.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so
You
much.
too.
Have a
Take
great
care. Thank you
holiday.
so much.
Take care.
Happy holidays.
Bye.